After Ivan showed up, I kind of stopped caring. I started thinking again about how everything always seemed to be conveniently handed to them, even in what was supposed to be a huge climactic battle at the end of the book ended up being a huge disappointment because these people conveniently showed up to save the day. Hello and welcome to Percontation Point's Video Snark. If you came here because you thought that this was an audiobook, please stick around and maybe learn some reading and listening comprehension skills. I read books, discuss what went wrong, and how they can possibly be fixed. I'm continuing my read-through of The Color Theory series by Ashley Bustamante. Not the first video, go check out the others, links are posted below. Chapter 34. The group starts to help Gavin and Sky clean up the mess. As they do, they question if the benefactors are going to come back. However, they're all of the opinion that it's a matter of when, not if. Ava also tells Blake that the benefactors are talking about parents who are both benefactors and says that she doesn't think that anybody else's parents are also benefactors. This is obviously worrying to Blake. Our time of planning and preparing wears thinner by the minute. What planning? Every step that they've made, they always did it at the absolute last second. They would still be squatting in that cave if the benefactors hadn't chased them away. Hell, I was so certain that they would sit on their fannies until Celine chased them down to New Prism. I've seen female leads in books who had no agency before, but never have I ever seen such an ensemble of cast who had such little agency. They simply go along with whatever until the author prods them into another direction. However, Ava telling Blake about his parents leads the others to the opinion that the benefactors are doing unspeakable things to their own parents. They're ready to rush out the door, but the actual adults stop them. Now that the war has finally brought itself directly to their doorstep, Sky and Gavin are now ready to jump into the fray. However, Blanca doesn't like the idea of waiting around any longer, mainly because her father isn't strong and she's worried what they might be doing to him. However, Elm is certain that the benefactors won't simply start torturing random citizens, but Blanca is quick to remind him that they turned Elm into a battery for a decade. Elm says that it's time to move as soon as possible, and he turns to Bree and Jazz and says that they should remain with their parents. However, the siblings have issue with this. They point out that they've been training with these specific teams, and having the two of them sit out would seriously cripple the others. Furthermore, it's not like the two of them can simply sit around invisible until all of this is resolved. They're already in too deep at this point. The next morning, Ava tells Sky and Gavin that they're going to be leaving in 3 days. The adults are obviously upset, but considering how upset that they are, not only at the thought of this group of children will be leaving, but the fact that their children are eyeball deep in this nonsense, they sure don't actually do anything to try and convince the group to either not go or to let Bree and Jazz stay behind. Later, Eva is doing some laundry when Sky comes over. She explains that Sammy had been teaching her how to see through illusions. This is why Sky could see Eva outside the window. Eva is worried that the invisibility devices aren't going to be much use anymore, but Sky assures her that she's on high alert, but also that she knew that the group had these things to begin with. They talk briefly about Ava's parents. Ava is upset that she's only gotten her parents back only for things to go sideways so fast. However, in this book's usual tone, it kind of glosses over how terrible that her parents had treated her, not only in abandoning her, but also in what they said to Ava when they visited her at the prison. But what else is new? Sky says that she wants everybody to leave Magnus and go to Neo Prism to start over, but this is obviously not anything that the rest of the group wants, so Ava is intentionally vague about her opinions on the matter. Chapter 35. Ava quietly tells everybody to meet up in Jazz's room later that night. Once they're gathered, Ava tells them that they're leaving tonight, because if they don't leave right now, it'll only make Gavin and Sky try to convince their children that they shouldn't go. Ava does take one moment to ensure that everybody is on board with leaving. However, Blanca is tired of this and insists that if they would have risked everything, broken out of jail, and come back to Magnus with them, they're obviously on board. The group doesn't need long to finish getting ready to leave. Before they go, Elm puts Sky and Gavin into a deep, untroubled sleep so that they can actually get away. Ava does feel a bit bad about leaving them abruptly like this, especially after how much that the couple helped them. She vows to one day return to the farm and offer them something in thanks. As the group leaves, Ava is conflicted with how unprepared she is, but also with thoughts that she is surrounded by shapers and mentalists who are her friends and allies. She tells all of them that they're important to her before commanding Elm and Sammy to lead the way. Chapter 36. The group reaches the building Elm and Sammy had found all those weeks ago. It had happened such a long time ago, even in the book, that I kind of forgot about it. But anyway, it's kind of a nondescript building, one that Ava said that she'd probably overlook if she happened to pass by. Sammy explains that she and Elm saw them carting in yellow stones. As they edge closer, a shrill sound starts up and all of their invisibility devices break all at the same time. Ava recalls something similar happening with her watch back in the first book and says that it's the instability of magic in the area that's breaking everything. The group is without the devices, but they obviously still have their own powers. There's nothing to do now except to move forward, so they go. Chapter 37. Beams of red and blue light start zapping them. They have their shields, but those don't even survive the first page of the chapter. The beams simultaneously are weapons, but also randomly start dragging people whenever they catch. Which, you know what? Why not? They're forced to fight some benefactors, and in the middle of the fighting, Ava takes a moment and she's like, wow, this is really terrible. When that group of benefactors has been dealt with, they have to fall back a little to regroup and plan their next move. Ava says that they should take out the barrier and says that she thinks that she saw a red orb over there. She and Jazz, both augmenters, will deal with it while the others are to protect them at all costs. Alan reminds them that their ultimate goal is to destroy everything here. There's an unspoken undercurrent of even if it means you die. Ava naturally doesn't like that, but again, there's not exactly a whole lot that they can do about this while they're in the middle of this battle. Once again, the best laid plans go awry, and not even a full page later, Elm's group shield goes down and Ava loses her focus and then becomes unwieldy the second Elm takes a shot directly to the chest. Despite the fact that literally everybody had agreed that destroying the red orb was the number one priority, it doesn't matter because her love got shot. She rushes to his side, intent to try to heal him with the help of the other augmenters in the group, only to realize that Jazz is also down. Then, to her immense surprise, Dr. Root shows up. The doctor reminds Ava to stay on task if she wants to help Elm, so Ava focuses on healing him. When Elm is more or less out of the woods, Ava finally looks up and realizes that Dr. Root didn't come alone. Not only is half of Neo Prism there, but under the leadership of Ivan. He apologizes for his poor behavior and explains that they came when Dr. Iris showed them that the children were moving to attack. Better late than never, I suppose. After this point, the chapter becomes stupidly contrived. Despite the fact that the battle is still going on around them, Ava takes a moment to touch base with her parents before turning her attention back to Elm. The boy took a blast to the chest and was completely unresponsive, but now he's able to be not only upright but also to jump back into the battle. After Ivan showed up, I kind of stopped caring. I started thinking again about how everything always seemed to be conveniently handed to them, even in what was supposed to be a huge climactic battle at the end of the book ended up being a huge disappointment because these people conveniently showed up to save the day. Once again, our main characters never once actually had to do much of anything except to be in the right place at the right time. They could have literally observed the building in the bushes, and then the actual adults would have shown up and taken care of business. Anyway, Ava goes over and destroys the red orb, but seconds after this, as Alma is congratulating her for a job well done, Celine tackles Ava to the ground. But Celine is surrounded by a bunch of people who'd rather see her punished and dead for her crime, so even she's such a non-issue that it's almost comical. I'd also like to point out that this is the second to last chapter in the middle book of a trilogy, so unless something really big happens in the last chapter, like Celine revealing that this goes deeper than any of them could possibly know, or Ivan turns around to betray them all, I'm not quite sure where the last book is even going to go, but we'll see, I guess. Chapter 38. Elm stops mind-controlling Celine and focuses on stopping the benefactors from trying to rush to her aid. However, as soon as they stop, Celine is quick to point out that they've stopped everybody by doing the exact same thing that Celine had been trying to warn others about mentalists. Elm is quick to call her out on her nonsense. He points out that mentalist magic is easily defended against. The book used an example of how quickly Sammy taught Sky, but this is obviously not mentioned now. But Celine all but ensured a mentalist takeover in ridding the city of anything to do with mentalists. Celine obviously still thinks that she's right, that this kind of power is too much, and people shouldn't have it at all. Ava is quick to tell her about how much damage was done with blue magic in the battle earlier. That magic is a neutral thing, but it's only up to the wielder if it's used for good or evil. Ava then demands that Celine take them inside and says that they'll use force if necessary. Being made to do things against her will, especially where mentalists are involved, is Celine's greatest fear, so this does the trick. Inside, Ava tells Celine that she must take them to where the mentalists are being kept. However, Celine asks like there aren't any in there, but obviously nobody believes her. She enters a code for the door, but then warns them that they can't all go in at once. For some reason, Ava believes this and says that only she and Em will go in with Celine. But at this point, they hesitate. Ava is uncertain of what kind of horrors await on the other side of the door. Also seems less certain, but insists that they'll open the door together. However, instead of finding torture victims, they instead find hundreds upon hundreds of children, and that's where the book ends. Which, okay, still not quite sure where this is going, but okay, why not? So now it's time for my wrap up and final thoughts. As I mentioned when I started reading this book, middle books and trilogies are often the soggiest. But even expecting something a bit worse than Vivid, and I still feel like I'm walking away feeling rather disappointed with Radiant. First off, not to introduce Horse the Dead Horse here, but as I kept saying, it was like they were literally incapable of thinking of anything more than a day or two in advance. They were living in a cave and never once made any sort of long term plan. They wanted to stop Celine, but how? They were barely able to feed themselves. Even when they were in Neo Prism, they basically sat around for a couple of weeks doing jack all. The same thing after they'd been arrested, and again when they went back to Magnus. If it was constantly saying things like, Celine must be stopped, but never did the urgency of her thoughts actually match up with any of her actions. Not once. I felt like it was only the author prodding the characters into the place that they needed to be. That was the sole reason why this book wasn't nothing more than the characters twiddling their thumbs in a cave for over 200 pages. In fact, that brings me to my second biggest issue, which was how convenient that everything ended up being for them. I think the first sign of this was with Sammy. She appeared when the plot needed her most to guide them safely after things fell apart in the cave, but so much time was spent building up Sammy as a character, gently introducing the readers to the idea that there really was some sort of community outside of the dome, that it kind of slipped by unnoticed. And while Sammy leading them to Neo Prison was kind of handed to them, it wasn't as much of a slap in the face as later movements were. When they were in jail, Sammy showed up right when the group was ready to break out on their own. When they were trying to get out from Neo Prison, Maribel showed up and offered to fly them closer to the dome. When they had nowhere else to go, Jazz and Bree mentioned that their parents would probably be sympathetic towards their cause. And last but not least, the huge and convenient letdown of Ivan showing up with the Neo Prison military force. Something else that I wanted to talk about in this book was the sudden introduction of a huge ensemble cast. In Vivid, it was pretty much Ava and with the supporting cast of Blake, while Celine did evil things. In Radiant, we were introduced to so many new characters in Chapter 1, and it only got worse from there. And while I'm certain that each and every single one of these characters are precious to the author, she made mood boards for every single one of them, I could barely keep them straight in the narration. Their lines of dialogue were interchangeable with one another's, none of them had any actual personalities, forget about any sort of long-term role that any of them had to play in the actual plot. And I'm not saying that their support wasn't kind of necessary to the advancement of the plot. All I'm saying is that if every single one of these secondary characters could have been replaced with literally any other secondary character, it's time to go back and do way more rewrites. And while we're on the subject of pointless characters who did nothing but drag the plot down, we need to talk about Ava's parents. I'm struggling to find literally any reason why to even include the subplot of surprise, your parents are still alive, and I'm coming up blank. I think that the plot of her parents had a lot of potential, and y'all know how much that I hate that word, but again, it fell flat. There was never any actual point to having them be in there. Especially if they're not going to end up being minor villains, what with them having had all but thrown their daughter to Celine. Now, I do want to touch upon some things in this book that I did enjoy. I liked how open that and Ava were not only with each other, but ensuring that everybody else was on board. Ava could have forced people to practice white magic when they were in the cave, but when somebody got hurt, she actually stopped. To be fair, I've read enough books whose plots could have been resolved in under 5 minutes if the characters talked to each other, so the bar is kind of on the ground at this point. But it was also really refreshing to see a character who openly acknowledged exactly how messed up that these dystopian wars can be, the entire concept of child soldiers, and that, yes, battles are seriously terrible. That being said, there's something that people have been bugging me about. I've been mentioning how I would fix this story, but I usually don't give too many specific details about how I, a fellow reader and writer, would fix a book, except whenever I write fix it fix. So, how would I have fixed Radiant? The first and most obvious being that there would have been scenes of the characters sitting around the cave simply talking about plans. Even if they were all deemed as being bad or non-viable, it would still show them at least trying to do something other than to simply sit around. I would also spend the first part of the book trying to deepen the reader's connection with maybe 2 or 3 new characters, to give them actual personalities. But other than that, I really wouldn't change much about the first part. It's only when they get into Neoprism that I start to have the book take a much darker direction. When they go to that first meeting with Ivan, Eva starts to get a weird feeling from him, a feeling that Elm failed to pick up on. But as they move around the city and start getting used to this new freedom, there are a few flags, specifically red flags. Red! The way that I'm thinking, the jump from Magnus to Neoprism should have been one of those from the pan into the fire situation. It went from bad to worse. Ivan is so against anything that Selene stands for that Neoprism is now anti-augmenter. And it starts off as a real slow burn at first, some microaggressions towards Eva. She finds that she and her augmenter friends got worse apartments than Shapers, but meanwhile Elm is being treated like a king. Kind of little things like that. She doesn't feel comfortable around Ivan, so she encourages her friends to meet in secret to continue to make plans. Real plans this time, no more non-viable plans. The time for sitting around has passed, and now it's time to get serious about this. Ava also meets her parents and a sister she never knew that she had. Turns out that Mrs. Locke was pregnant when they left Ava behind, except that in my version, I'd really lean into the two-faced scumbag thing. They wouldn't say as much outright, but there would be some pretty heavy-handed hints that these two yellows who produce an orange somehow or another were disappointed with even the little bit of red in Ava. So when the going got tough, they decided to roll the dice on their next child and abandon Ava to Selene. Their second child would pretty much be a replacement goldfish for Ava, to the point that her name would be something like Eva. She would also be exactly like Ava had been at the start of Vivid. That is to say, blindly obedient and brainwashed to the entire idea of mentalist supremacy. Not only would Eva exist as a way to highlight how turbulent Mr. and Mrs. Locke had been towards Ava, it would also highlight how far that Ava has come in her own character arc. As things in Neoprism slowly get worse and worse, I think that it would quickly start to drive a bit of a wedge between Ava and Elm. Not enough to break them up long term, but enough to weaken the group as a whole. That there would be taking sides and making further magic study difficult, but not impossible. The scene with Sammy's betrayal would still happen, but her motives would be a bit more obvious. She's angry that Elm would side with an augmenter over a fellow mentalist. Maybe there would be a racism metaphor about color mixings, even with Ava's status as an orange magic user. The prison business would be pretty much the same, except that in the last chapter, right as the children are getting ready to break out, both Eva and Sammy come running into the prison and say something like, "Celine's brought an army and they're destroying the city. You have to help stop it. You're the only ones who know white magic anymore," and end things there. However, it's kind of hard to say all of this without knowing how the final book is going to play out. Obviously, with the weird twist thrown at the end about the children, it's clear that the author is going to take Chromatic in a completely wild direction. Probably something that I can't begin to anticipate, but at the same time, there was simply so much wasted potential in this book. Too much padding, too much time spent watching characters simply waiting around and doing literally nothing, not even spitballing potential plans on how to take down Selene. So frustrating. I hate books with potential. Was this the worst book that I've ever read? No. Even for the middle book of a young adult trilogy, it was right on average with what I'd been expecting. Right up to the time that they got thrown into jail. That's when things started to really go downhill. The next book in the series is Chromatic, but it's not expected to drop until next May, so stay tuned for more info about that. In the meantime, the next book will be The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith. I obviously have a lot to say about that, but as usual, it will have to wait until that gets started. I also think that I'm going to take next week off and jump into Cuckoo's Calling in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening to my Book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all of your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main Book Snarks, always free and updated every morning. The only edit to Patreon is to become a member without paying. You'll get access to the same things on Tumblr, but on Patreon. Supporters can have access to so many more Book Snarks starting at $1 a month. Also new is a 1-week free Patreon trail, so be sure to check that out. Special thanks to Dawn, Phoebe, and Nikki for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my snark so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too. For just $6 per chapter, I will tell you how awful that your writing is. But not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well. Just $10 per chapter. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of spicy short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you don't follow me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys!